Thank you, Peg. 2 Samuel chapter 2. Excuse me. We'll start at 23. 2 Samuel chapter 2, verse 23. For a long time, David has been on the run from Saul. God has anointed him to be king. He's had to wait 10 plus years. And we find him now taking over Judah. That we had that map last week, that one tribe. Benjamin's not with him. He has Judah, and I think he has Jabesh Gilead. He made a play for Jabesh Gilead, and I think he got that. And so it's David, and David has Joab, Abishai, and Ashiel, the three sons of his sister. So they're his nephews. And then Abner, who is Saul's right-hand man. Saul is dead. Abner has made Ishbosheth king. And Ishbosheth, who was never meant to be king, is king over the rest of Israel. And we've got now this prolonged fight. And last week as we finished, Ashiel is killed by Abner. Ashiel comes after Abner, who is on Saul's side. He relentlessly follows until he's dead. And so you have one of David's nephews, one of the three that was for David, dead on the floor. They don't exactly know how he died, but they reckon he just stopped. And Ashiel was fast. He stopped and he ran himself right into the sword, and it killed him. In verse 23, Ashiel refuses to turn back. Abner thrust the butt end of his spear through Ashiel's stomach, and the spear came out through his back. He stumbled to the ground and died there. And everyone who came by that spot, in other words, all of David's people, all of David's fighting men, stood still when they saw Ashiel lying there. You can understand that that's not great for morale, right? Here's David's people. Ashiel was fighting for them, and now they see Ashiel lying on the floor, dead. They all stopped. By that spot, they stopped and they stood still. And so Joab and Abishai, David's nephews, the two that are left, find out what had happened. And you can understand when your brother's dead, what's your first reaction? Revenge, right? And so they set out after Abner, who's this prideful man who has set up the king, Ishbosheth, who's always been against David, who's always been for Saul. Abner's one of the most prideful people you'll meet. He's politically savvy. He'll do what he needs to do to gain power, to keep power. He's put Ishbosheth in there because he's not really the king, and Abner's really getting to do what he wants to do. And Abner has started all this fighting. Remember, it was his idea why 12 versus 12 would fight, and they all died. And there's this big, long fight between David's side and Saul's side. And yet last week we said in chapter 3, the whole point of this was David is going to be stronger and stronger, and Saul's dynasty is going to get less and less. So over all of this, for 7.5 years, David only is king over Judah. After 7.5 years, for like 32 or 33 years, he'll be king over all of Israel. But for those after being on the run, he still only gets to be king of Judah for the first 7.5 years. And God, who has promised him the kingship, will work everything out so David gets the kingship. But in between, there's all kinds of trouble, all kinds of strife. And it really starts, this whole thing kind of starts with Abner going ahead, doing his own thing, being prideful, all kinds of stuff. And look what happens. In verse 24, it says, Joab and Abishai found out what had happened. Joab's kind of David's right-hand man. And Abishai, they found out what had happened. They set out after Abner. The sun was just going down as they arrived at the hill of Ammah near Giah, along the road to the wilderness of Gibeon. Abner's troop from the tribe of Benjamin regrouped there. Abner, this is really a fight between Benjamin and Judah, and Abner takes his troops and they're at the top of the hill. Abner has just killed Ashiel. Abner has the one who has put in a wrong king. Abner is all over this stuff. And he says to him, and this is crazy, so Abner, who is using the Benjamites to kill David's people, who has just killed David's nephew, stands and says, Abner shouts down to Joab, must we always be killing each other? kind of a weird thing to say when you've just killed Ashiel, right? But he's killed Ashiel, and he says, must we be always killing each other? Don't you realize that what? That bitterness is only the result. That phrase has wrecked me this way. I mean, in a good way. It's crazy. That bitterness is the only result. And don't you see that that's what the devil is all about in our lives? He'll use anything or anyone to make you bitter. And let's face it, the greatest challenge of our lives is that we're going to have, listen, if you looked at your life, every day you have reason to be bitter at something or someone. Every single day, there can be a reason to be bitter. And yet our battle is to have joy and to have peace and to be kind and to be self-controlled. And it's very, very difficult to live in a world that is full of bitterness and full of reasons to be bitter and stay calm and stay peaceful and stay joyful. But that's the power of the Spirit of God. And whilst people can not be very helpful in making you bitter, you can't stand in front of God and say, well, they made me bitter. If you have God, you don't have to be bitter. I keep saying there's two options when life hits, when things happen. You'll either get bitter or better, right? You'll either turn to the Lord and get strength, or you'll get bitter. And I really started thinking about this. Let's just be real for a minute. They say those on a Wednesday night come, and they're the ones who really love the pastor. They're dedicated enough to come on a Wednesday. So we're going to test this theory out. I don't know what that means, because then Sunday is anyway, Wednesday. But the great challenge for any church, this story has got so much bitterness in it, and God uses it. God turns around what the devil means for harm for good, right? And God is going to put David on his throne, and he uses all of it. But there's so much bitterness, so much strife. So, some of these stories, if you didn't read it and you said, and I just told you these stories, you'd say there's no way that's in the Bible. You wouldn't believe it. Some of the stuff is crazy. And yet, can we just be honest a minute? Whether it's in your marriage, or in your family, or at your workplace, or even in the church, this idea of what he just said, he said, bitterness is only, don't you realize that bitterness is the only result? That the greatest challenge you have in your marriage is not allowing bitterness to come in. Because you give your spouse reason to be bitter. Right? There's reasons they could look at you and say, I'm really agitated right now, and I'm really frustrated, and I'm really kind of resentful because you've done whatever. But do you see, it never was more apparent to me, the challenge that we have as a church. The challenge for me as your pastor, and the challenge for you as a congregation. Let's just be real. There are times, because of what's preached, what's said, what's viewed, what decisions are made, people in the congregation get bitter against me. That's a fact. That's a fact that I have to deal with. That I can't say, well, and my natural reaction is either to yell at them or to just ignore them. It's hard to be a shepherd when you're doing either one of them. And so there are people who get bitter, and then their bitterness spreads because they start talking and one bitter person leads to, and then people become bitter, and it's not even their fight, they just become bitter. And so that's a real challenge for me. That's a real challenge for me that people. But do you see the challenges for me too? That also pastors get bitter against people. The pastors can get frustrated at people, that whether it's I'm preaching stuff that no one seems to understand. There could be 1,000 reasons why I get bitter towards you. But do you see, that is a great challenge that there are so many fights in your marriage, in your life, especially in the church, that the only result is bitterness. I don't know if you've seen it, if you've paid attention to it, but if you ever thought when people fight or when bitterness comes, who won from that? The only person that really wins is the enemy. There have been so many times in church, you look and you think, nobody won from that. Like that, I don't even understand what that was about but do you see that? I want to be real and I want to be fair. Like everybody struggles with that. Whether it's you bitter at me or guess what? Pastors get bitter too. So if you think it's hard for you, guess what? It's hard for that. For me, it's a challenge for all of us. And we come back to, look, whilst I have to do everything I can to help you not be bitter, and you do me. And if we'll understand that, and if we'll take steps to guard that, things will be. Now look, if the truth is being preached and people get bitter, you can't do much with that. If you do the right thing and I get bitter against you, there's nothing you can do about that. You can't change that. You can't. But Hebrews talks about this root of bitterness. Don't let it grow because it'll start spreading. And you think in your life, in your marriage, how many times, that's what the devil wants to do, right? The devil wants to sow bitterness, discord, because if you're bitter in your marriage, and all through this story, that is David's biggest challenge. I mean, if David had do you think David has reasons to be bitter? And yet that was his whole thing, right? Just trust David. Just trust me. Saul's a lunatic. Saul's crazy. There's so many unjust things happening to you, but just trust me. And when David had his men bitter against him, they wanted to kill him, remember, because of Ziklag, and it was burned, and the children and the wives were gone, and they all wanted to stone him. And it says, and David turned to who? David turned to God and found his strength. So I want us to be aware in our own lives, like, I've got to watch how bitter I can get. And I've got to try and allow, and if people come at you bitter, you've got to somehow, by God's power and by God's Spirit, stand against that. It's a lot easier said than done, right? But if you have to ask yourself, why am I, there's so many, like this whole story in Samuel. God is doing it. And I told you last week that when it says in chapter 3 that David is going to get stronger and Saul's dynasty, that's what God's doing. But look what happens. And so he says, this fighting, it's only going to lead to bitterness. When will you call off your men from chasing their Israelite brothers? This is kind of a crazy statement. So Abner, who started all this fight, who's fighting against David, who's fighting against God because he's fighting against David, now claims that they're brothers. It's a bit weird to claim brothership now when you're fighting one another. But he says, when will you call off your men from chasing their Israelite brothers? So Joab, who's on David's side, who has just lost his brother, says, God only knows what would have happened if you hadn't spoken, for we would have chased you all night if necessary. It seems, and if you don't read on, it seems like this is all over. It seems like Abner stands at top of the mountain and says to Joab, hey, let's stop fighting. The only thing that's going to happen is bitterness. And Joab listens. Joab, who's on David's side. And by the way, watch what kind of deals you do with the enemy. Like you can't make peace with people like Abner because Abner is coming after God. And so they tried to make this peace deal. And when I first read it, you're like, oh man, and then you read on and the whole thing changes. It looks like Joab is good with it. And look what happens in verse 28. So Joab blew the ram's horn and his men stopped chasing the troops of Israel. So you've got Judah fighting and Benjamin fighting, and Joab blows the ram's horn. And when the ram's horn is blown, no one fights any longer. So it looks like it's over. It looks like, but here, before we read on, do you know that if you don't deal with bitterness, you can stand in a moment, but if you don't really deal with it, guess what's coming? Like if it's in you, it's coming out. Like we got to get rid of, if you don't get rid of the root of the bitterness, and by the way, the bitterness comes mainly because it's hurt your pride. Like when you really start to think, why am I bitter against that person? It's really interesting what you'll find out about yourself. They made me feel a certain way, or I lost my pride there, or whatever it might be. And so we'll see that revenge is just around the corner, because that's what bitterness does. Bitterness has to come out, right? And the worst thing we could ever do is in any way be bitter against God. And yet people will tell you that's exactly what happens. They start to question, they start to falter, because somewhere down the line, maybe you don't even verbalize it, but you're upset with the Lord because something happened or didn't happen, and that's the greatest trick of the devil. That's what he did with Adam and Eve, essentially, right? Caused Eve to be a little bitter, and then she went. So bear with me, look at what happens. Abner and his men retreat through the Jordan Valley. They cross the Jordan, traveling all through the morning, and they go back to Mahanaim. Meanwhile, Joab, who's David's man, Abner is Saul and Joab is David, if you want to remember it like that. And his men returned home. Abner has started this fight. And what God is doing is reducing Saul's dynasty because he's given it to David. And look what happens. God's already working. Look, no matter how much, and this should give us hope, no matter how much Abner fights, no matter what it looks like, you've just lost your brother. If you've just lost your brother, it might be hard to think that God is good or God is working or you're even winning. But God is over all of this. And there's this fight between Abner and Joab, between Abner's men, Saul's, and Joab's men, David. And it says, remember, they fought 12 on 12, and they all died, and so then there was a fight, right? And the Bible earlier in this chapter says that David's men win. But now it gives you the information. Look what happens. And Abner is very prideful. Abner's the one who fell asleep by Saul. When Abishai, who's here, David's nephew, and David go and attack the king, remember, and they find him, and they could have killed him, and they don't in the camp when 3,000 are sleeping. And then look what it says. Joab counted his casualty. How many did he have? He had 19 plus Asahel, so he had 20 men. So on David's side of this fight, God has allowed 20 men to die. But 360 of Abner's men were killed, all from the tribe of Benjamin. So the tribe of Benjamin is coming after God, and they start this fight. Abner starts this fight, and when you look at the results, it's an annihilation. God isn't going to be messed with. God isn't going to lose. God is going to put David on the throne. And Abner's bitterness and Abner's jealousy and pride has really started. 360 of Abner's men had been killed. Okay, so you've got 360 men dead. And what is the point? What did they gain out of it? What's Abner gained from losing 360 men? Nothing. You ever looked at your life and thought, that fight got me absolutely nothing? I did all of that, went through it. That's what bitterness does. That's what pride will do. That's what arrogance and ignorance and doing your own thing will do. Joab and his men took Ashael's body to Bethlehem. They buried him in his father's tomb. And they traveled all night and reached Hebron at daybreak. In chapter 3 and verse 1. That was the beginning of a long war, maybe a couple of years long war. And look at what the fight was. Those who were loyal to Saul and those who were loyal to David. This shouldn't even be a fight. This isn't a choice. God has told them who to follow. God has anointed David. And we'll find out that Abner's fully aware of what's happening. And yet, they keep trying to do their own thing. And by the way, that's why 360 men are dead, because they're coming against God's calling. God has called David to be king. You start to mess with that, and guess what God does? He protects his own. 360 men are dead because they chose the wrong side of the fence. They chose Saul rather than... And by the way, Saul's dead. And Saul's dead because God allowed him to die because he messed the whole thing up. And he gave his kingdom to David. And the Bible says as time passed. See, this is what God is doing. How frustrating must it be to David? And by the way, what's crazy is Abishai was the one who came with David, and he knows David's heart. He knows he doesn't want to kill Saul. He was right there when he said, I'm not killing Saul. The heart of David is different, but they're now going renegade. They're all doing their own thing. David doesn't even know what's going on. We'll find that out. And it says, David became stronger and stronger. See, this is this picture of David's dynasty became stronger and stronger. And in the big picture, God is saying, hold on, David, I'm working everything out. I'm making you strong. This is a pathway to everything I've promised you. But do you see how many ways that David could be bitter? How many things go wrong in his eyes? How many enemies he has? How many days on the run he has? And yet through it all, God is calling him, don't get bitter. Just trust me. I'm going to work it all out in my time, in my way. Nobody who has been told they want their king wants to be king of one tribe for 7.5 years. If someone said, hey, I want you to take over this business, but I'm only going to give you one section and you're going to have to do that for 7.5 years. It's yours, but you're only going to get a tiny fragment. He had to trust God the whole way. And in ways, David nails it. In ways, David doesn't get bitter. And Saul's is coming weaker and weaker. And God is eliminating the enemy step by step, moment by moment. But that takes time. And then this is wild. You see this weird thing about David. He has, in the end, 8 wives. Not a great idea. I can't handle one, let alone 7 more. But you know what's interesting as you study Samuel, which I didn't really realize before? That we read, so whilst he's in Hebron, whilst he's waiting on God and leading Judah, David gets a bit crazy, right? He's having kids all over the place. I mean, this is like a bad Jerry Springer show. Like, dude's had 6 kids with 6 wives. I mean, these are the sons. This is in Hebron. Hebron, David is just sleeping with these people. And this is just, he has Bathsheba and Michal on top of this, and then he has all these concubines. I mean, dude has a problem. But what's really crazy is it lust? Yeah, there's lust there. Right? Obviously, when you're sleeping with all those women, you have concubines. Lust has something to do with it, right? Bathsheba got him. I mean, he got Bathsheba because of lust. But do you see what's even more crazy? When you're king, and you're only king of one part, you have to trust God. But what does your flesh want to do? Your flesh wants to fight or push an agenda or do a deal so that you can get what? More and more ground. That's what politics is, right? Gain one more vote at a time, one more state, one more city, one more person. And whilst he doesn't fight, you know what he's doing somewhat of sleeping with these women? He's making political alliances. He's strengthening himself by sleeping with women. He's having and we'll go into this in a minute. But basically, he's not just doing it because he loves them. He's doing it because it's politically savvy to do it. It gives him strength. It gives him more resources. It gets him in. He's gonna ask for, remember his wife, Michal? He won her when he beat the Philistines. And when he escapes, she kind of throws him under the bus. And there's this man named Palti. And his wife, Michal, is given to Palti. And David's going to demand her back. But David and her have this weird relationship. She never bears him children, and she goes mental at him in a few chapters because he's worshiping the Lord. But part of the reason he wants her back isn't because he loves her so much. It's because it's Saul's kid. And if I'm fighting Saul, it's dynasty. It does me good to have Saul's kid. Do you see what I'm saying? He's not just marrying people and sleeping with people because he loves them. Somewhat what he's doing is trying to push his own what? Mm-hmm. Do you think God ever said, hey, David, the way we're going to get the kingdom is I'm just going to let you go and sleep with whoever you want, pick them, and that's my plan. Look, the oldest son, the second, the fourth, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, all of them with hardly names you can pronounce. So just read them yourself. 6 kids, 6 different, I mean, we would kind of worry about someone like that, right? Next time I apply for a job just for kicks and giggles, I might say I've got 6 wives with 6 children and see what they say. Verse 6. The war between the house of Saul and the house of David went on. Abner became a powerful leader among those loyal to Saul. That's exactly what he wanted. Abner always wanted the power. Saul's dead. Ishbosheth is just a puppet king. And so Abner really thinks he's in charge. Oh, one day Ishbosheth, this man that he'd put in, Saul's son that he'd put in charge of all the rest of Israel, accused Abner of sleeping with one of his father's concubines, a woman named Rizpah, daughter of Aiah. Now this is really interesting. So the king is kind of not really involved in this. The king has been put in by Abner, but the king's nowhere really to be seen. It's Abner who's pulling all the shots. We don't know, and you can try and figure it out. You can read different commentaries. They'll tell you different things. We don't know if this is true or not. We don't know if Abner really slept with the concubine or not. He may have done. Look, it wouldn't surprise me if he did. I'm not against him not doing it. I don't know. I kind of lean towards he did, but it doesn't really tell you. But do you understand? Do you understand if he slept with his concubine, why he's sleeping with a concubine? It's not just for lust. This is a power play. Because weirdly enough, the king's concubines, do you know who they go to? The next king. So Saul's concubines were all to go to the next king, which would be David, but in this case, because what Abner's done, it's Ishbosheth. And so Ishbosheth, this is kind of weird, right? Ishbosheth inherits Saul's concubines. And this political savviness is this, that if you slept with a king's concubine, it's an act of treason. When you sleep with a king's concubine, it's your power play to take over and to show that you're not afraid. It's a power play to take over the kingdom. So Abner, whether he does or not, he is accused by... Now, either Ishbosheth is tired of Abner running it and he just wants to get rid of him, or this legitimately happened and the king is really mad because he slept with his concubine. But in verse 7 it said he accused Abner of sleeping with one of his father's concubines, a woman named Rizpah, daughter of Aiah. So he slept with Saul's concubine, but it's really Ishbosheth's concubine now. Abner was furious. How long did it take for a prideful, arrogant man to get bitter? Now, if he's falsely accused, you can understand why he's furious, right? If he actually did it, then that's more strange. Am I some Judean dog to be kicked around like this? Now listen to what he thinks. You have to realize, no matter what Abner's do in your life, God has got it. Like Abner is a real problem. Abner is this guy who's coming against God. He's fighting for Saul's kingdom. He's doing all this stuff. And he says, am I some Judean dog to be kicked around like this, he shouted. After all I have done for your father Saul and his family and friends by not handing you over to David. Do you see the arrogance and the ignorance of that? Why has David not been handed over to Saul? Why is David still around? It's God. That's the only reason David is around. You think Abner really had anything to do with protecting whoever? Look at what he says. I have done for your father by not handing you over to David. So not only he's going to claim David, but he says, I have protected you from David too. Saul and his family and friends, by not handing you over to David, is this my reward? So he wants to take credit in a minute for protecting and doing all this stuff, but he also says that I could have handed you over to David, but I didn't. Well, hold on a minute. If you think you have the power, Abner hasn't done any of this. And by the way, if his great treaty in life is, I kept Saul safe, A, he was sleeping, and B, Saul's dead. Look at what it says. After I've all done for your father Saul and his family and friends by not handing you over to David, is this my reward? In other words, he thinks he's in control. He thinks that he could have changed this whole narrative, that you find fault with me about this woman. May God strike me and even kill me if I don't do everything I can to help David get what the Lord has promised him. This is a wild statement. In one moment, he is so mad. He's been fighting for Saul and his kingdom all this time, and Abner now says, I'm about to change alliances. I'm going to flip-flop because it behooves me. You've ticked me off so much, I'm so bitter, I'm going to now turn and fight for who? I'm going to fight for David. But listen to this, and this is what we have to watch out for. Listen to this. This is mesmerizing. Look at what it says. So he says, hey, look, I've done you a favor. I've kept Saul safe, which isn't really true. I haven't handed over David to you. Well, Saul was never going to get handed over to David because David was getting trained through all of that. But look at what he says. May God strike me and even kill me if I don't do everything I can to help David get what the Lord has promised him. Do you catch why that's an amazing statement? Hold on. Be careful that you don't fall into this trap. Listen to what Abner just said. Abner understands 1,000% what God has promised. Abner knows that God Almighty has proclaimed David to be king. And yet what has he done? He's put Ishbosheth in, and he's fought God every step of the way. You say, how does that relate to us? I'll tell you how it relates to us. When we knowingly understand the principles and the promises and the direction of God, and we do our own thing anyway. Abner wasn't ignorant, wasn't some guy that didn't get the text message. And if Abner knows it, how many people do you suppose know? Hold on. How many people, if Abner knows it, how many people do you think in Israel know that David has been promised by God and anointed by God to be king? How many? Bunches of them. And one tribe is with him at the moment. Everybody, and that's part of God's orchestration. But Benjamin is fighting David. Benjamin is fighting Judah, knowing full well that God Almighty has said, it's David. Watch in your life that you don't get caught in that trap. Let's be honest. How many times, whether it's in your house, at the church, at your job, have you pushed an agenda and done stuff knowing full well it's a wrong thing to do? You ever been there? You know it's wrong. You know it's wrong. And you keep pushing anyway. Abner did it. Abner knew the promises of God. Abner knew that it was David. And yet somehow in his arrogance, in his ignorance, in his sin, in his blindness, he still fought against God. It'd be one thing if he didn't know all of that. He knew every bit of it. He knew God's promise, and he was that arrogant that he says, it's been me this whole time. That's why Saul survived as long as he did, because I didn't hand you over to David. Think about that in our lives. Think about that in people's lives that you've seen. They know it's wrong. They know it's wrong. And they do it anyway. Look at what he says. I'm going to take Saul's kingdom and give it to David. This is what God had said. I'm going to take Saul's kingdom and give it to David. I will establish the throne of David over all Israel as well as Judah, all the way from Dan in the north to Beersheba in the south. God has taken Saul's kingdom. This is exactly what God had promised. And Ishbosheth didn't say another word because he was afraid of what Abner might do. And Abner thinks he's in power. Abner thinks that if he changes sides, then they're going to win. And it says in verse 12, Abner sent messages to David, doesn't this entire line belong to you? So he's known the whole time. He's known the whole time that the entire land, not just Judah, Abner knows that God has promised to David and all of that, the entire land. And now he comes he sent messengers to David. He doesn't go himself. He sends messengers and he says to David, doesn't the entire land belong to you? Well, yeah, it does. Make a solemn pact with me and I will help turn over all Israel to you. Abner calls on David and says, I'm going to switch allegiances. I know that the land belongs to you, and if you'll let me, I'll help you. Verse 13, David says, right, we'll do it. But I will not negotiate with you unless you bring back my wife Michal, Saul's daughter, when you come. David says, I'll let you help me. I'll use you. You can be on our side. But I'm not signing this agreement until you bring my wife back. That's what I'm saying. I don't believe it's because he was madly in love with her. But it was politically savvy to have Saul's wife back. Saul's child back. And by the way, he's still married to her. It's nuts. Saul gives his daughter away, but Saul promised. Remember, David killed 200 Philistines. Remember? Took the foreskin. Anyway. But that's what he did. And he won Michal. And Saul just randomly decides to give her to Palti. And so David and by the way, wouldn't that make you a bit bitter? You fought, you won this deal, you got this wife, and now she's ran off with Palti. Not the best. Another reason to be bitter, but God's going to work it all out. And he says, I'm not signing this kind of peace agreement, this agreement we're going to have, unless you bring back my wife, who Palti took. This is another thing that is crazy about this passage. Look at what it says. In verse 13, I will not negotiate with you unless you bring back my wife, Michal, Saul's daughter, when you come. David sent this message to Ishbosheth, Saul's son. Give me back my wife, Michal, for I bought her with the lives of 100 Philistines. That's not even true. He downplays that because he was told to kill 100, but he actually kills twice that many. So Ishbosheth listen to this. Ishbosheth the king, Saul's kid, took Michal away from her husband Palti. So he tells the king, hey, I want my wife back. And so the king gives him his wife back. And look at what it says. Palti followed along behind her as far as Barim, weeping as he what? Went. Hold on. So Palti is weeping. Why? Because he's lost David's wife. Palti didn't care that he took David's wife. He hasn't cared a lick about what he's doing with David's wife. But when she leaves, he starts to what? It's just, you can't write this stuff. This is what I'm saying. The dude is literally running crying. Proclaiming kind of like this, no fair, right? But hold on. You stole her in the first place. It's akin to stealing something, them getting it back and following crying saying, I want it back. You stole it. But there's a bigger, deeper point here. If you're going to do something to someone, don't be surprised when it happens to you. Like, how do you trust someone like Palti? If Palti's going to steal you away from someone else, then why won't he do it again? Like sometimes we get messed up with people. We get messed up in this stuff, right? And we don't realize that breaks, like, how can you trust anybody like that? Like, Palti is crying and he's lost, but it's not even his wife. It's David's wife. And by the way, she was the first one, so this is like the legitimate one. But what I'm saying is, right, if you go on a killing spree with someone, if you and someone go around and kill other people, don't be surprised when that gun, for some reason, turns on you. You got to watch what you Palti now is crying. I don't think Michal really wants to go back with David, but she doesn't have a choice. I just find that really weird. Like, see, we're okay. When we benefit, when we're on the side, we don't care how much we hurt people, how bitter that. He didn't care that he took David's wife, but now that he's lost it, he cares. Be careful you don't do that. Be careful that when you're like taking things from people, you're happy about it. But then don't expect to, like when that happens to you, then it's crazy. Anyway, so he's crying. And Abner just says what? Just go home. Meanwhile, Abner consults with the elders of Israel. Here he goes. He's doing his political thing. For some time now, he told them, you have wanted to make David your king. Now is the time. And listen to what he says. This is what I'm saying. For the Lord has said, I have chosen David to save my people Israel from the hands of the Philistine and from all their other enemies. That's exactly what God had promised, and Abner knew it. That's exactly what God had promised. Abner spoke with the men of Benjamin. He went to Hebron to tell David that all the people of Israel and Benjamin had agreed to support him. It's all looking good, right? Abner has now switched sides, and now he's turning on, and he's going to everybody else and saying, look, you've wanted to hand it over to King David. Now it's time. Let's do it. Let's give everything to David. Abner and 20 of his men came to Hebron. David entertained them with a great feast. And Abner said to David, let me go and call an assembly of all Israel to support my lord the king. They will make a covenant with you to make you their king, and you will rule over everything your heart desires. This is it, David. This is the moment. You're going to get all the kingship. You're going to get it. Everything your heart desires. So David sends what? They make this agreement. Everything's good. And David simply says, Abner, go home. And then look what happens. But after David had sent Abner away in safety, Joab, who has lost his brother, Joab, who was the one that called the fight off because Abner said, let's call the truth, it'll only lead to bitterness. Joab, the man who runs for David, Joab comes back from this mission and he finds out that Abner has been there. And do you see, if you don't kill bitterness, it's going to come out? That there's been this kind of truth. Like if you just read the first part of this, you think, Joab, you're very strong. Like you were so self-controlled. You could have gone after him, but you didn't. You lost your brother, but you called the truce. Oh, hallelujah. You've got self-control. But hold on. That bitter root, it's right there. And look what happens. Abner comes and he stays with David, and Joab cannot understand why David didn't take care of business. He said, and he sent Abner away in safety. Joab and some of David's troops returned from a raid, bringing much plunder with them. David has sent Joab to raid to get more land, to get more stuff. Joab has come back victorious. When Joab arrived, he was told that Abner had just been there visiting the king and had been sent away in safety. Joab gets back to David, and he knows now that Abner has met with David, and he expects that David will kill who? He expects that David will kill Abner. And when David doesn't do as he thinks he should, Joab loses it. You ever been there? That bitterness was fine until something sparked it. You see, the whole plot of all of this stuff is, guys, just let God do it. And none of them seem able to do it. Joab rushes to the king and demands, what have you done? What do you mean by letting Abner get away? You know perfectly well that he came to spy on you and find out everything you're doing. This is crazy. This is another thing we have to learn. My dad taught me this a long time ago. People who always blame people for certain stuff, that's their sin. I.e., if someone's always talking about how prideful everybody else is, 1,000% that's what they struggle. If someone's always hitting the same sin in others, you know what they're dealing with? That sin. You can almost listen, if you say to people, what sin do you really hate the most in people? it's almost going to give you the answer of, that's a sin I struggle with the most. My dad said that he preached conferences, and he got weirded out after a while because all this guy that he preached with would talk about was sexual immorality. Every sermon, everything, like a smokescreen. So the last person people would ever think was sexually immoral was old boy, because he's staunch against it. And guess what? Caught having an affair. And it was like a smokescreen. And people look at people like, oh, he's so against sexual stuff, he would never do that. And yet, that's exactly what his deal was. Joab comes and he blames Abner, and he says, he's come to spy on you and find out everything you're doing. He basically says, he's up to no good. He's doing the wrong thing. He's really, really being sly. That's what he's saying. He's got you, David. He's got you. You're getting suckered in. He came to spy on you, and you've let him go like a fool. And now he's going to beat us because he's got intel, he's got what he wanted, and he's ran away. And you should have killed him. And you didn't. So, Joab leaves David and sent messages to catch up with Abner. So Joab, who has just said how bad Abner is, and how tricky and how sly Abner is, now does the very same thing. Look at what he does. He calls Abner back. David has no clue this is going on, by the way. They found him at the well of Sirah and brought him back. David knew nothing about it. When Abner arrived back at Hebron, Joab took him aside at the gateway as if to speak with him privately. Joab says, hey, come. I got a message for you. And God knows everything. And Abner comes to this meeting thinking everything's above board. And Joab, the one who has just been yelling about how, sneaky Abner is, it says, Joab took him aside at the gateway as if to speak with him privately. But he stabbed what? He stabbed Abner in the stomach and killed him. For what? What does it say? For revenge for what? Okay. That was a couple of years ago. You see how bitterness ruined him? Be careful before you think you've conquered bitterness. Because this moment triggered Joab. It's almost like he's dealt with it. But when he got home and knew that David could have killed Abner and he didn't, that was it. And revenge came out like a wild dragon. Like, that's all. And you think God said that? Hey, Joab's not consulting with David. You know why he's not consulting with David? Because David would tell him, don't do it. And so Joab comes and he kills Abner in revenge for killing his brother Asahel. What did he say? Like a prophetic word that he didn't even know. This will only end in what? In bitterness. Asahel's dead. Abner is dead. There's going to be a whole bunch more crazy. And by the way, what's really interesting, and I'll finish here. What's really interesting about David is people say, well, why didn't the Lord do something about his 6 wives? Like, how did David get away with that? When we read through the rest of these stories, do you know how much pain and agony and suffering David got because of that stuff? Like, when you see David's life, when he slept with Bathsheba, it cost him his kid. Like, don't ever think that David would come and be like, hey, 8 wives actually is a good idea. You see, we have this thought that David got away with it. What I'm telling you is the pain and the suffering and the mess and all that happened to David, which we'll see. I believe if he was stood here tonight, he'd be like, do what God tells you to do. I didn't do it. See, it was normal for kings to do that, but God has told the king of Israel, don't multiply your horses, don't multiply your wives. And you get this picture all the way through this story. Asahel is dead, Abner's dead. God's using it, sure, God's using it, God's sovereign, and God's going to put David on the throne, and he's going to use all of it. But isn't this kind of a weird, like, who's winning in this? I mean, ultimately, God's going to use it, and he's going to do what he's going to do. But do you see, look, if you read this story, and Joab blows the horn, and it seems like peace, it seems like Joab's got it together, but years later, in the moment, and by the way, how long did it take him to hatch this plan? He got home, he got ticked off, and immediately he was like, get him back, and I'm going to kill him. And by the way, when he kills Abner, you think Joab had the peace and joy he thought would come with it? You ever done something in revenge? You ever done something, I'm going to give them a piece of my mind? It doesn't really feel too good, does it? I'm going to get them back. That's our natural reaction, right? I'm going to get them for that. By God's grace, you don't go down that line. But if you do, you know as well as I do, that when you do the wrong thing, how quick is it to be like, I shouldn't have done that? You ever mouthed off and you're like, I shouldn't have said that? And how long sometimes does it take to get convicted? If only I could get that text message back. If only I hadn't said that. If only I didn't react like that. But I'm telling you, bitterness is... Studying this has just made me like... I don't know how to say this. I believe, for me, I can only speak for me, it's one of the greatest challenges of my life with every person I meet. When I look at what the devil does in my marriage, I think this is a major tool. Just get bitter. Just get frustrated. Just get agitated. Just do your own thing. Take care of it yourself. I can't tell you, looking back at my life, how many friendships I've lost because I couldn't overcome the bitterness. Because legitimately they did me wrong. And instead of doing the right thing, I just let them go. I just let them go. And you know when your parents tell you stuff, when you're younger you think they're crazy? And then the older you get, you realize, oh man. My mom saw that a long time ago. And she said to me once, because she knew what I was like. And I tell my mom and dad, I was like, I don't understand why you're still messing with those people. Like I seen what they did to them in church. I seen all of it. And I said, Mom, what are you doing? Why are you even messing with them? Like, just ignore them. And she looked at me and said, Phil, if you want to be a pastor, if you want to serve the Lord, you can't do that. I was like, oh, I can. Oh, I can. But if you're going to be a proper shepherd, imagine how many people would be left if every time someone ticked you off, you're like, you're done. I get bitter at myself, so no one would be in there. We've got to realize that the enemy takes stuff that people do and tries to destroy you with it. And I look back at my life today and I realize how many stupid mistakes I've made. I had a legitimate case. I could say they did me wrong, blah, blah, blah. But you know what? Sometimes nobody wins. Nobody wins. And you've got to trust the Lord enough to be like, God, I need you to handle this for me. I need you. Joab doesn't need to be killing Abner. David will be really mad because he knows you shouldn't do that. Does anyone have any questions, thoughts, observations before?